Sorry. Well, hello everyone. Welcome back. I'm Kris. This is a video that was, I just forgot how to talk. This video is sponsored by Mohamed. That's what I was trying to say. This is Slavery in Islam, Dr. Jonathan Brown. Sorry, it's my phone. We're going to break this down into about 6 videos. Be about 18 and a half-ish minutes of each video. We're going to do that because, oh, Dr. Yasser. I love some Dr. Yasser. Okay. Quick update for people who were wondering. With the roof, they're shingling it, one section. It rained. I didn't hear any water. I was so excited. Then the guy came over. One of the guys came over. We did a water test, so we just hosed the whole area down, and I removed that tarp, and as soon as I did, bloop, a little drop of water. Can't find where it's coming from. So the alternative is just to caulk everything, and then eventually, hopefully, everything will kind of heat up, but it's going into winter, so it's not good. And the other is that they rip all the shingles off, all the paper, and then look at all the wood and start to seal everything with caulk and everything and smearing it all out. And then I have to buy more paper and shingles, which is where all the cost is. Shingles are where all the cost is. That'd be about another $3,000. You know, I don't budget for any of that. I budgeted it for it to be done correctly. And it's not that it's incorrect. It's just that there's something that's just not, can't find it. And it's driving me crazy. Better than what it was, unfortunately. This cup is green. The cup is green. And it's really, it's not green. I'm sorry. It's like an off green, but it's really weird to see it completely weird like that. So I've got my pumpkin spice coffee, and we're going to get into this video. But before we get started, as I told you, this video is sponsored by Mohamed. Would you like to sponsor a video? You can go on down to the, they don't have one here. Oh, well, I don't know. You can go down to the thanks button on my channel. You can donate, and you can request a video. And if you do, your name will be sponsored in that video. You can still request videos if you don't donate. It just takes a little bit longer to get to. You can subscribe to the channel if you'd like. Most of the people who watch my videos aren't subscribed. But bare minimum, if you could just do this. That's, I mean, look, that's, you just move your mouse, you just click on that button. That helps me out tremendously. Lets YouTube know things from things. I don't know how it works. So I'm just going to go ahead and start the video. Oh. We're going to go ahead and get into it right now. ربي والإسلام ديني ومحمدا رسول الله ويقيني أدنو إليه ساجدا بجبيني اقبل صلاتي وللصواب اهديني.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين أما بعد. So I'm sure all of us are very excited for today's lecture. I'm not going to stand between you and our expert except by setting it up insha'Allah ta'ala, this issue of slavery and Islam. And the reason why this topic is so difficult for us to discuss, well, there are many reasons, but we as Muslims are primarily interested in how can we understand the fact that Islam maybe potentially has allowed something that we are taught is so immoral. When Islam came, it abolished so many things. It abolished drinking alcohol. it eradicated, or at least it wanted to eradicate racism. And alcohol and racism were rampant across the globe. Our young men and women say, why didn't Islam come and eradicate slavery as well? That's a theological question. Why not?
Because people are still going to be people. Not every person who's good, and I'm not saying, who's good, they're good people. Good people still do bad things. There was a quote, I'm going to butcher who said it, and I'm probably going to butcher the quote. If men were angels, we wouldn't need... If men were angels, we wouldn't need borders, or we wouldn't have wars. It's something to that effect. If people were good, we would all just do the right thing. We don't. Some do. Some will always do right because, it's just something in them won't allow to do bad. Other people will always do good. But if the chance comes where you got to step on somebody's head to get up that ladder of success in life, they'll do it. All in the thought that I'm better than that person because of this or because of that. People are just going to people. People going to people.
And on the flip side, we have those that want to reinterpret Islam completely when it comes to gender and sexuality and morality. And they say, look, you guys, you ultra-conservative folks, you're not advocating slavery anymore. So if we can get rid of slavery, why can't we get rid of gender and gender roles?
Because gender and gender roles are inherently women make better mothers to give birth than men do. And men make better hunters kind of thing in terms of, it's genetically in our genes, in our traits, in our character. Just because you try to change the gender and say this and say that doesn't make it correct, doesn't make it right.
You guys are willing to abandon one aspect that was once upon a time a part of Islam, then why can't we also abandon another aspect? So we are stuck between a rock and a hard place. We are stuck between those groups that are saying, how could Islam have allowed it? How could Islam have allowed something that is so intrinsically evil? And they either reject Islam, or our young men and women are doubting Islam. And on the other side, we have those that are saying, oh yeah, that's the whole point. Islam can evolve over time. Just like Islam evolved with slavery, so too they say to us, it should also evolve with same-sex and with this and with that. Why can't we do that as well? And so that's why this topic is one that really does require so much talk and discussion. And I'm very, very honored and pleased to have with us today Dr. Jonathan Brown. Dr. Jonathan Brown is the Prince Walid ibn Talal Chair of Islamic Civilization in the School of Foreign Service at Georgetown University. Dr. Brown received his BA in history from Georgetown in 2000. By the way, he converted to Islam in the late 90s. It's on a personal, that's not on the official bio, but I'll tell you, he converted to Islam in high school and
second year of university.
Second year of university, sorry. He converted to Islam second year of university.
High school is like a sabiqun.
Okay, so he's not sabiqun al-awwalun, he's sabiqun al-thaniyun. What is he? The second batch of converts, but pre-9/11, which is a very important point and milestone. He finished his BA from Georgetown in 2000, and then his PhD from University of Chicago in 2006. And Dr. Brown has studied and conducted research in countries such as Egypt, Syria, Turkey, Morocco, Saudi Arabia, Yemen, South Africa, India, Indonesia, Iran, all of these countries. His book publications include The Canonization of Bukhari and Muslim, Hadith, Muhammad's Legacy in the Medieval and Modern World, Muhammad, A Very Short Introduction, which was selected for the National Endowment for the Humanities Bridging Cultures Muslim Journeys bookshelf. His book, Misquoting Muhammad, The Challenges and Choices of Interpreting the Prophet's Legacy, and it goes on and on and on. His He has published extensively in the fields of hadith, which is what he is primarily known for in the academic world, Islamic law, Salafism, Sufism, Arabic lexical theory, and pre-Islamic poetry. What have you not published on? And he is the editor-in-chief of the Oxford Encyclopedia of Islam and Islamic Law. Dr. Brown's current research interests include Islamic legal reform and a translation of Sahih al-Bukhari. He is also the director of research at the Yaqeen Institute, and I'm also very honored to say he is a very near and dear friend for a very long time, alhamdulillah. So when I invited him to come to East Plano, he immediately jumped and agreed, even though it was just a month's notice or so. So alhamdulillah, he is here. So without further ado, should I tell you why they wrote the book, or are you going to tell them why you wrote the book?
Yeah, I'll tell them why.
Okay, without further ado, Dr. Jonathan Brown.
Okay, Bismillah. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. إن الحمد لله وبه نستعين والصلاة والسلام على سيد المرسلين وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. This topic, well, actually all the topics I write about are personal topics in the sense that I picked them because I have questions. And I remember very clearly when I had this question, because that was just after I became Muslim. It would have been probably in the fall of 1997, and I remember I was sitting in my old house, in my family's house, in my old room, and I was reading a translation of the Quran, and I came across the verse. Obviously, I was reading translation, right? But the verse said, "ضرب الله مثلا عبدا مملوكا لا يقدر على شيء ومن رزقناه منا رزقا حسنا." Right? So, God, the God gives you a parable of a slave who's owned and can't do anything, as opposed to someone who, we presume a free person, whom we have given a goodly sustenance, and he spends out of that in secret and in private. And this actually is not making any law about slavery. It's using this as a parable for talking about idols that have no power versus God that has all power. But I remember being confused because I was thinking to myself, how can God talk about slavery just kind of randomly and not say slavery is wrong? Because slavery is wrong. How can you just talk about it like that and treat it like it's no big deal? I think maybe a lot of us read these verses in the Quran, or maybe especially younger people read these verses in the Quran and don't really know what to make of them, and we kind of pass over them and then assume that there's some answer. But I think it causes a lot of doubt. And so when I decided to write this book was after the ISIS thing happened, because that was really, it was 2015, it really caused a crisis for a lot of young Muslims, because they saw these people who said they were doing exactly what the Sharia, they were saying they were doing exactly what the Quran and the Prophet ﷺ had done in taking slaves. And so a lot of young Muslims were sitting there saying, wait a second, not only does my scripture talk about slavery, but now people who say they're following that scripture and who can point clearly to verses in the Quran and the Sunnah are doing so in the name of Islam. And it was really caused a lot of people to leave Islam, a lot of people to have doubts, and a lot of anxiety. So that's why I wrote this book, which is here. Yasser has it. Sheikh Yasser, sorry. And Yasser's fine. So I also forgot to thank you for inviting me, and thank you all for coming. It's a really big honor, and I hope this will be useful for you. I'm going to talk about a huge amount of material, so I'm going to go, if you're used to books of fiqh, this is a dalil-free book. This is not a book with adillah. This is a book that's mukhtasar, because I'm going to go through a lot of material. So I want you to turn your brains on high power, right? I'm going to rely on high power, Texan high power brain functioning. Yes, that's a thing. Let's do that. Let's go with that, okay? Texas high power brain functioning. All right. So there's I remember when we read these verses of the Quran, there's two issues, right? One is this sort of like, how can God just mention slavery and not say slavery is wrong or you shouldn't have slaves? And the second thing, which is a sort of a compound problem, is how do we explain our sense of discomfort? So if we believe that the Quran is the word of God, and we believe that the Sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ is inspired by God, and the prophet is incapable of moral error, how do we also explain the fact that deep in our guts, we feel that slavery is wrong? I mean, how can the Quran be allowing something, and in our guts we feel that it's so wrong we can't conceive of it being allowed? How do we even conceptualize that? Just the existence of that feeling becomes a problem. So these are the two things I want to talk about today. One, sort of how do we make sense of the moral problem of slavery? And then how do we make sense of our moral reaction to it? And these are really these are problems of what's called moral ontology. Now, that's the only really big word I'm going to use in this lecture, I think, a moral ontology. Well, ontology is a study of existence. And so moral ontology is really talking about what is morality? Where does it come from? What is the matter of morality? What is it made of? What does it weigh? What kinds of morality are there? We all know slavery is wrong, right? I mean, if I go out and I ask a random person on the street, or ask one of you in the crowd just off the street, is slavery wrong? You're going to say, yes, of course it's wrong. Okay, what does that mean? If it's wrong, how come the Prophet ﷺ had slaves? How come the early Muslims had slaves? I mean, did they not know it was wrong? How do we answer this question?
It was a different time where morally slaves were accepted. It was not frowned upon like it would be today. And I'm not trying to make an excuse for a slave, because if I was a slave back then, I would hate for somebody to have just given the answer that I gave. But unfortunately, human beings put themselves in hierarchies. White people, black people. If you go just race-wise, white people put themselves in hierarchy in class above other white people. You know, they have the tiers and all the way down. It's not fair. If you're born in this lower class and you're working harder than somebody who's up here who just has things given to them, you're going to hate that. And this is about slavery, I understand. But because we have that ability to put ourselves in hierarchy in skin color, we can also look at other skin color. And I'm not saying now, but I'm saying back then, a white person could look at a black person and instantly think, oh, well, I'm better than them, because when they took slaves from Africa, they might look at the black person, see him with a spear and like a loincloth and something like that. And here they are dressed, they dressed weird in those days anyways, but here they are looking at them thinking, well, look at the outfits they're wearing. They're not human like me, so I must clearly be better than them. And so I could take that person and I can, you know what I mean? Is it right? Absolutely not. On any level, is it right? Was it done? Yes. Unfortunately, people did that. And I always go back to this. I'm a big George Washington fan. One of the things he had was he owned 100 and some slaves, and then Martha Washington had dowry slaves, which were basically, I am beating the hell out of my microphone stand. Dowry slaves were slaves that she inherited those slaves after her husband died. Those slaves were to work for her until their kids were of 18, and then it was property. It was just transferred to them. And she could not, and even Washington could not free them, because if he did, he would have to he could be sued by the kids. He would have to pay a price or buy slaves to replace those slaves. Well, you're freeing slaves, now you have to buy slaves to replace them. Dowry slaves was much worse than normally just buying a slave, because you bought that slave, you owned him, you could set him free. Unfortunately, that slave could be captured. His paper showing he was a free man, just torn up, and he's a slave all over again. It was a terrible time worldwide for people to be held in bondage. I'm not, I think we can all understand it's a terrible thing. And unfortunately, it still goes on today. It's a terrible thing, and I'm not trying to just ease over it. I'm just trying to say that, unfortunately, we as human beings allowed that. We try not to do it now, but we as human beings, we failed other human beings. As a white guy, I'm kind of guilty of that too. My ancestors, from what I have checked, didn't own slaves, but that doesn't mean that, if I went back 300 years, that doesn't mean that 400 years back they didn't. You know what I mean? It's just, it is what it is.
What does it mean to be, what kind of wrong is it? What kind of wrong is it? So these are questions that I want to try and talk about today. Okay, slavery is really hard to talk about. It's really hard to talk about globally. It's extremely hard to talk about in the United States. And there's a couple of reasons for this. The first one is that in the United States, slavery is intimately and continues to be tied to the question of race. And you don't have to be very observant or have been in this country very long to know about issues of race in this country, especially between Black Americans and white Americans. And this was an issue that was formed and shaped by, and then also shaped, slavery in the United States.
Real fast. When Abraham Lincoln, Civil War started, he had the Emancipation Proclamation. I am so sorry. I apologize to you, okay? I will not hit you anymore. I shouldn't make that promise. The Emancipation Proclamation, to which he told all the slaves of the South, you are free. What was the downside to that? Well, all the slave owners in the North, and there were, he didn't free them. Instead, it was going to be gradual freedom for them, maybe over a year, 2 years, 10 years. I don't remember offhand that he unfortunately passed away. He was murdered, assassinated. So I don't know if we know that policy that he would have enacted. But I just lost my train of thought. Hold on. I completely lost my train of thought. Oh, I got it. One of the things in the North, there were a lot of abolitionists. Those abolitionists were fighting against owning black people as property, having them enslaved. But if you were to go back in time right now, I'm going to say 90. I mean, it's easy to say 99%, but I'm going to go down and say 90%. If you were to ask all of them, 90% would say, yes, they should be free. Would you want them living next to you? Absolutely not. No, get them out of the country. 90% of those people did not want them there. Even though they didn't believe they should be free, they didn't want to live next to him, next to black people, former slaves. No. Send them home. I don't want them here living next to me. No. I don't want any part of that. Abolitionists were on the right track in that slavery's bad. Let's free these people. They don't deserve to live. You get one life, and you're forcing them to live that way. That's not fair. Would you help them? I would absolutely help them. Would you build a house on your property and let them live there? I will burn my property to the ground before I allow, and it's like, so close. But even then, people in the North, abolitionists who believed slavery was bad, they were still racist, did not want them next to them. So, in the United States is such a tough thing to discuss. It really is. I know plenty of black people that it's just not a subject that they want to bring up because white people get very uncomfortable and feel tremendous guilt, and I'm told that I'm guilty because I'm white. It's like, oh, okay. My ancestors didn't own slaves, but okay, yep, it's my fault. But in the end, we as people are all guilty. You may not have owned slaves, but Your family back in the days probably knew people who did, or it was alive when they were alive and they looked at it like, I mean, that's happening way over there on the other side of that hill, out of sight, out of mind, you know?
Right. So talking about slavery means talking about race. And it's especially painful because the injustices and the harms caused by slavery in the United States continue to be with us in our society. So it's a live wire, not in the sense that it's it's sensitive. In the sense that it's actually a real living problem. Okay. The second reason it's very difficult to talk about is because it involves tying our brain in knots. It involves tying our brain in knots, and people don't like to do that. It causes them anxiety. I'm going to give you an example. Who remembers the Charlottesville protests in 2017, summer of 2017? Charlottesville, Virginia, University of Virginia, founded by Thomas Jefferson. Of course, there's a nice big statue of Thomas Jefferson there.
That's where his home is as well. I was there in 2016. I visited his home. Beautiful home. If you own an American nickel and you look on the back, you'll see his house on there. And when you're in his house, they'd say, "Who has a nickel?" And so I was digging through and somebody said, "Okay, I got a nickel." And I'm standing by his back door. And they go, "Okay, right now, hold up this nickel." And I'm standing there and I'm holding the nickel, looking at it. And they go, "Right now, you were looking at yourself. Because you're looking at from the back of the property to the back of the house. And I'm standing at that window looking out." And they were like, "You're looking at yourself right now." And I kind of giggled.
Thomas Jefferson was the author of the Declaration of Independence, one of the leading thinkers of the American Revolution, a man who believed in freedom of democracy, and a man who had a lot of slaves and had children with one of his slave women, right?
Sally Hemings, yeah, he got her pregnant when he was in, I almost said Florida, France. Got her pregnant when he was in France. She came over with his daughter because that was his daughter's personal toy, unfortunately. She was 14 or maybe 16 years old. He got her pregnant. In France, she was free. She could do whatever she wanted. And he had to negotiate with her to come back. She did. And the agreement was like the children, his children with her would be free, I think at the age of 21. Maybe 24. And I don't think he did free them. There was also, was it John Hemings? Sally had a brother who was the carpenter. Like a woodworker. And if you go in the mansion today, you see the woodworking that he did at various places. I don't know who trained that man, but it is beautiful. I mean, I don't know how long it took, but we have machines that could probably do something similar, but not to the extent that he did. I mean, it's beautiful.
Those children were then also slaves. He eventually freed them, but they were also slaves. So there were a lot of protesters at University of Virginia saying slavery is an evil. It's history's greatest crime. It's wrong no matter where you are or when. And we don't want a statue of a guy who was a slave owner and who raped a slave woman up in front of our university. That's a pretty good argument, right? I mean, that's like a pretty good logical argument. Slavery is evil. This guy did slavery. Statue's got to go. Donald Trump came out, and he summarized the situation in a way that remarkably only he could do. He said, George Washington's a slave owner. Are you going to take down statues of George Washington? Imagine taking down every statue of George Washington. Imagine renaming everything that's called Washington. It's topographically or toponymically exhausting to think about that. And it's just impossible politically in the United States to talk about this issue. Wait a second, we have a contradiction here. Slavery is evil. George Washington was a slave owner. Why do we name everything after him? So this is what I call the slavery conundrum. There's an American slavery conundrum and there's an Islamic slavery conundrum, and they're very similar to one another. But I'll give you basically the slavery conundrum. The slavery conundrum is that there are three axioms that we have to hold in modern America and in the modern West and maybe in the modern world. There's three axioms we have to hold in our mind, but it's impossible to hold all three in your mind at the same time because they're contradictory. What are they? First, slavery is an intrinsic and gross moral evil. What does that mean? Intrinsic. It means that slavery itself is evil. It's not slavery is evil because it makes you sad. It's not slavery evil because you're miserable. It's not slavery evil because it causes abuse of rights. Slavery in and of itself is evil. And it's not just, a little evil like me, smacking Yasser on the back of the head for no reason. This is a gross evil. This is never the lesser of two evils. This is never the thing you can do because there's something you think is more harmful. It is never excusable. It is a gross and intrinsic evil across space and time. What do I mean across space and time? Was slavery wrong when Thomas Jefferson did it? Talk to me like Americans. Tell me, give me the American answer. Was slavery wrong when Thomas Jefferson did it? Yes. Okay, was slavery wrong during the Roman period? Yes. Was slavery wrong during the Egyptian times? Yes. It's throughout space and time. Second, so that's the first axiom. What's the second axiom? Imagine this. Go into what do you guys have instead of dinner parties here? Barbecues?
Biryani parties.
Yeah, but I want something with non-Muslims.
Yeah, barbecues, yeah.
Okay, barbecues. Imagine you go to your company barbecue and someone asks you about slavery in Islam. And you say, yeah, there was slavery, but it wasn't that bad. How's that barbecue going to go for you? Well, I don't know, actually. Texas, I'm not sure. I don't know. I'm not sure. Okay, I'm going to retract that comment. Edit that out of the video. Half my family's from Texas, so I have love for this place. But the point is, the second axiom, all slavery is slavery. There's no, you're not allowed to make distinctions within slavery. There's no good slavery and bad slavery. There's no benevolent slavery and harmful slavery. All slavery is slavery. Okay? So that's axiom number 2. Axiom number 3, our past has some kind of moral or legal right over us. It has some kind of moral or legal power over us. It has some kind of moral or legal authority over us. If you're a Muslim, we know what that is, right? The Quran and the Sunnah of the Prophet are our sources of guidance and morality. If God commands us to do something, if the Prophet commands us to do something, we say, سَمِعْنَا وَأَطَعْنَا. Right? What is justice? It's what God commands. What is injustice? What God forbids. If you're American, maybe it's not that dramatic, but the Constitution, the Founding Fathers, these people have authority over us. I mean, we might disagree with them, but their ideas, their writings define our political life. Right? I mean, try going into a barbecue and just say, George Washington was a real piece of, what. See what happens. It's not going to go very well. What's the problem here? These 3 axioms cannot be held at the same time.
I just want to say, unfortunately, if I'm at a place and somebody says that, I'm going to say, you're right. Thank you for just yawning right in my face. I appreciate that. I'm going to say, you're right, but in not in all aspects of his life. And that's because I like Washington. I've read 9 books about him. I visited his home 3 times. I've got 7 more books on the shelf. He's a fascinating figure to me. When I go to his home, I also visit the slave quarter, pay my respects there, and I mentally justify that it was allowed, even though it's a terrible thing, because I like him. And it's one thing that I hate doing. Because, and I always use the trade-off, if Washington were born today, would he be a slave owner? Absolutely not. And if he were, I would hate him. But it's a different time, and I allow it. I'm sorry for interrupting so much.
So I say, okay, yes, Thomas Jefferson had slaves, but it was different back then. You can't say that. Slavery is a transhistoric evil throughout space and time. Yeah, there is slavery in the Bible, but slavery in the Bible is not that, it's not like slavery in America. It's not that bad. Oh, you're saying there's some kind of slavery that's okay? So here's the problem. There is no religious or philosophical tradition that I know of, and I've done a lot of research on this. There is no philosophical or religious tradition that I know of that did not either defend, accept, or condone slavery until the 1600s, at the very earliest 1600s.
I'm going to end part 1 there. This one right here is hungry. So that's why she's up here, because she's ready for some food. I'm ready for some too. I think I'm going to make some French toast. I'm going to make it myself. I'm not going to use any, because all I got is dogs, and they're terrible cooks. They don't know how to cook anything. So I'm going to end this here. I'm going to get some more coffee. I got to get a fan on me because the coffee's making me sweat. So, until part 2, I'm enjoying this conversation. Probably because he's talking about the Founding Fathers. And I like talking about the Founding. I'm a nerd for the Founding Fathers. I love this stuff. So, until part 2, which button do I hit? Right here. Have a good day. Have a good night.